This is the Tecware Fusion, and it's straight up a gateway drug into the world of small form factor PCs. The Tecware Fusion is quite impressive because it is MATX compatible but ITX size, and that creates a very interesting proposition, so let's talk about it. In short, the biggest strength of the Tecware Fusion is that it's efficient with space, and its layout makes it much smaller feeling than it actually is. Compared to the NR200 and NKSM1, the tiny kings, it's substantially bigger. But because of how efficient it uses its space, because of how much it can fit, and because its aspect ratio is this long, narrow cuboid like a shoebox rather than a full tower, feels very compact and still does feel like a small form factor rig, even though it can actually fit in a MATX motherboard. That makes it look very clean and, in my opinion, a bit boring. It looks very similar to the NR200 and the low-key ghosts of the world, which is not going to be a problem for 90% of people. But for a maximalist like me who loves intricate designs, the minimalism is a bit... But whatever, it definitely looks presentable and it definitely looks nice, and it's not outlandish in any way, shape or form. The build quality is pretty good too, with metal all round apart from the I/O on the front and the feet being rubber, and the optional tempered glass panel is a very nice touch to overall structural rigidity too. I do recommend you get this because I think it looks really nice. It's only about 20 Singapore dollars, and it doesn't actually hurt ventilation too much so long as you don't use the vertical GPU mount. Speaking of cooling, the flat front is usually a problem when you're looking for people as well as for building a PC. But the flat front isn't really an issue here because the flat front, well, doesn't really affect the airflow due to how it's laid out and how it's designed. This case was designed to have a bottom-up airflow, as indicated by, well, its general layout and by the fact that it had a 120mm fan exhausting air on the top as a default setup. This means that because it's sucking air from the bottom and exhausting it out the top, you don't have to worry about the flat front not giving enough ventilation to give you fresh air to cool your CPU and GPU, which you can fit a pretty powerful one in here, by the way, if you want to, which is definitely a good thing. And that means that that clean flat front can be preserved. Speaking of clean, my Instagram feed is pretty clean, so make sure you follow me, linked in the description down below. However, there is an issue here. By having a bottom-up airflow, it might be a concern for people who are building a PC with AMD CPUs, because if you're using a tower cooler, you're unable to rotate your tower cooler to have the fans and heatsink be pointed in the right direction. Because AMD CPU cooler mounts are asymmetrical, it has to go one way, which usually is this way with a tower cooler. If you have an Intel CPU, that's not a concern because the CPU cooler mount on Intel CPUs, it's symmetrical, so you can just rotate your heatsink however you like it. But in the case of AMD CPUs, if you're using a tower cooler, that might be cause for concern. However, I'm not so sure how much of a performance impact having the heatsink this way instead of this way is going to be, because I haven't actually been able to test it. I don't have the equipment to do so. And if you want me to test it, make sure you subscribe and support this channel. Then maybe one day I can figure out if it's going to be a big issue. But it is definitely something to be aware of if you are building in this. And that's why I recommend if you build with an AMD CPU in this rig, use a cooler that's a non-tower cooler, so like or use an all-in-one water cooler if you're building in this PC with an AMD CPU. On the topic of airflow, you have the possibility of mounting up to 220mm fans up top, a 240 radiator on the side with this rail, and a 240 radiator on the bottom. This is at max airflow setup, of course, and it will be heavily dependent on what else is in your setup, as ATX power supplies, vertical GPUs, etc. all will affect the options that you have. Thankfully though, it's all explained in a very clear and neat flowchart from Tecware. You should pause it to read it, and I think all manufacturers should learn from this flowchart. And yes, you can't mount the 240mm radiator on the side if you choose to go with the tempered glass side panel, because, well, then you won't have the ventilation holes anymore. So it depends on how much airflow you actually need. And yes, you've heard me right. If so desired, you can purchase a vertical GPU adapter from Tecware and mount your GPU and show off your RTX 3080 vertically. The vertical GPU does cut airflow to both your CPU and your GPU heavily, and it limits your air cooler clearance from the usual 155mm for a CPU tower cooler to 88mm. At 155mm, it's just shy of being able to fit the legendary Noctua U12S and the legendary Hyper 212, so hopefully Tecware can find a way to squeeze 3 more millimeters into this in the future, because those coolers are very nice to be able to mount in here. But at 155mm, you can still fit many very good CPU coolers in here. At 88mm with restricted airflow, it's a lot harder to keep a CPU cooler cool, especially if you're sticking to air cooling. Now, I personally don't recommend GPU mounting for this. As much as I think GPU mounting looks pretty cool, you get a way cleaner and better cooled system if you keep it stocked. So that's how I recommend you do it. For me, if I were to build a PC in this with no budget and no worries, I would use an SFF PSU to get maximum GPU compatibility, M-ATX motherboard to save cost and get more PCIe slots, a nice Noctua cooler, and maxing out all the drives for storage to be used in video editing. It sure does support a lot of storage. You can fit up to 4 drives in the base located towards the front, with 2 of those drive bays supporting 3.5-inch hard drives as well. So you will need to use this cage that it comes with, which will restrict the GPU compatibility of your PC. Either way though, I still think it's plenty amount of drive support, especially because we live in a world full of small form factor NVMe SSDs that go up to 8 or even 10 terabytes down the road. Kids these days will never know the struggle of managing SATA data and SATA power cables together. All that's good and all, but how is it like to actually build it? Well, I think it's pretty decent and it's definitely a comfortable case to work in. It's not loads of space, but if we are comparing this PC case to say an apartment in Hong Kong or an apartment in New York or Tokyo, it's definitely roomed to work with. You need a certain level of finesse when working in tight spaces, which is something I don't have, but my friend Alex does, and well, it went pretty smoothly for him. The side panels are all easily removed with these ball and socket joints, and it's nice to see that the screws are generally quite standardized and minimized as much as possible. And I really like it when stuff is designed that you have to screw things less. Screws come super neat and pre-organized in a neat plastic container, which I absolutely love because it means that I can pack my lunch in it for my hamster once I'm done building my PC. And overall, it's quite straightforward to understand the online manuals. But truth be told, I just love that screw box. I think everyone should be doing it. If Tecware can do it, everyone else should. Cable management is reasonably okay too. But as with all SFF PCs, please be kind to your fingers and get a semi or fully modular PSU. The only issue here is that there's not really a place for you to conceal excess cables and conceal excess stuff, especially if that hard drive case is removed. Perhaps a little cover or a little bit of black vinyl will be available for you to slot in there in the front, so that if there is cable mess, you'll be able to hide it just by slapping something over there so you don't have to look at it, which I think would definitely help, the overall aesthetics of the case. There's also some space behind the motherboard, but it's really quite narrow, so unless you have very thin braided cables, there's not much you can fit in there apart from maybe RGB and fan cables, and you can manage that as such. But so long as you wrap it up and tie things down, I think you can still get a very nice looking PC in here as long as you put in the work. It's gonna take some effort for sure, as with every single small form factor PC, but it will definitely be doable and a lot easier to do than in a Cooler Master NR200, that's for sure. So for the price, is the Tecware Fusion worth it? Well, for 90 Singapore dollars, it's very competitive, and with the tempered glass side panel, which is reasonably priced at 20 Singapore dollars, it's still quite a good deal. It's definitely in the running for a small form factor PC case if you're shopping for one in its price range. And I think the most important aspect of this thing is that it supports M-ATX. In my opinion, that is a huge deal, and it's not one that is talked about enough. All the cheapest motherboards are M-ATX, and for people on a tight budget, spec for spec, being able to get an M-ATX board not only allows for even more expansion, but also allows plenty of cost savings too. Although M-ATX is not very popular from most regions, in Southeast Asia, where I live and where Tecware operates mainly, having M-ATX as an option is just straight up a great decision from Tecware when they were designing this case. Because it means you can build a small form factor PC without having to pay another $50 to $100 for an ITX motherboard, because ITX motherboards are just intolerably expensive these days. Sure, as for small form factor side of things, the Fusion isn't going to be the most compact, tightest body there is, but its increased flexibility is definitely helpful in terms of making it easy to build with, easy to get compatible parts, and easy to save a buck on a motherboard, which definitely helps beginner or first-time small form factor PC builders. If you're looking for the smallest, look elsewhere. If you're looking for a versatile small form factor PC case that can save you a buck by letting you use M-ATX motherboards, this is pretty much one of your very few choices, and it's good at what it does. So if that kind of case is what you're looking for, this might be right for you. And with that, thanks for watching. All questions on my Discord group where people can help you, and subscribe and like if you enjoyed my video. Follow me on Instagram before I hit 10k subscribers on YouTube because a big giveaway is coming. And if you follow and join before I hit 10k subs, you have more likelihood to win. They're a very exciting giveaway coming very soon. Thank you guys so much for watching. Goodbye.